Our next speaker this morning is Kathy Bryson. Kathy was actually born in Costa Rica and has spent her childhood in Puerto Rico, Bolivia, and Haiti. She is currently she's an international training director of SIFAT. ECHO has a very unique relationship with SIFAT. And SIFAT was actually founded in 1979 by Kathy's parents, and I did not realize that connection. She has a master's degree in public health, specializing in international maternal and child health. Kathy and her husband have lived and worked together with the marginalized peoples in Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Mexico, and her current work is in Honduras and Haiti. Would you please welcome Kathy Bryson as she comes to speak to us on integrating practical nutrition education into community agricultural programs. Kathy?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here. ECHO is a very special place for me. I remember I first came down here to Fort Myers, I think I was 10 or 12, and we were on the way back from Bolivia, and it was just an A-frame house out there. And my parents had to stop by and see Martin and Bonnie, and wow, it's wonderful how God has blessed this organization, and I thank God for Martin and Bonnie and for this organization and for you all being here and what you do. I am with SIFAT as the International Training Director. I was thinking what would be the best thing that I could share with you. There's a lot of research about nutrition and agriculture that has come out just recently, but I really wanted to leave you with some practical things because I know there's several of you here who are in the field, in the trenches. So I've got some demonstrations I'm going to be showing soon. I want to make sure I know how to turn this. Can you push it in the middle? Okay. Okay. All right. SIFAT, our mission is to share God's love through service, education, and personal involvement with a needy world. And we're located in Alabama, in the middle of a rural area on a 175-acre rural campus. And we have people who've come now from 93 different countries around the world to get training in appropriate technologies and the processes of community development. So agriculture and nutrition, what do they have in common? What do they not have in common? Is there a relationship between the two? Does increased agriculture production equal improved nutrition? Not necessarily. They both have to do with food, so you'd think if we have more food, we'd be, especially in places where undernutrition is a problem, that we would be better off. Malnutrition affects approximately 1 in 3 people around the world in all its forms, including the overnutrition that we're now dealing with both in this country and the double burden of malnutrition in the developing world. 1 in 3 people, you can see there the figures of the children. 159 million that are stunted, 41 million overweight, 50 million wasted. Now, usually when we think of malnourished children, you have a certain mental image in your mind. It's like an emaciated child where you know they haven't had enough to eat, and they didn't have enough food. But if you see that the 50 million is the kind that you just look at them and you think, well, they're too skinny. But the far more insidious form of malnutrition is the stunting. You see at the top, where you look at those kids, and if you didn't know how old they were and how tall they were supposed to be, you'd think they'd be doing fine. And I've seen a lot of docs in many different countries. I've served as translator and in public health programs. And they're like, wow, you know, I really thought I expected them to be worse off than they were. So how do we measure malnutrition? And a lot of times it will be with the wasted. You see the second one there, it's for height, how much the person is thin for their height. And then they're stunted, which means they're shorter than normal. And if you look at them, as I said, you wouldn't know necessarily that they were malnourished. And then there's wasted and stunted. What you do and eat in the first 1,000 days makes a difference for the rest of your life. How many of you have heard of this? The first 1,000 days. I hope you promote that, whatever you're doing and whatever you're working, from the point of conception until the second year. It's laying the framework for the entire life of that person. The neural connections, the basic, that's that incredible window opportunity that if it's missed, you can never fully regain it. It doesn't mean we don't keep on trying and working with severely malnourished children to have enrichment in the environmental aspects, but we'll never regain what it could have been. This is an example when you see these children of wasting, it gets the headlines. But globally, in any given year, this type of hunger is really less than 10% of the whole problem of hunger. A lot of times this type of, if you're in difficult situations, this type of malnutrition, you can measure that if they're doing triage for who needs to be treated the most urgently, the upper arm circumference, halfway between here and the elbow. If it's the screening severe acute malnutrition is if that's less than 11 centimeters from a child that's 6 months to 5 years old. There's that standard. And we would use a lot of times little bracelets, and if it slips up on the arm real fast, then they're triaged like those are severe, they need more attention. Okay, see these precious little children? These are Guatemalan, and Guatemalan are some of the most stunted children in the world. There are many, many, many more mildly to moderately malnourished children globally than the moderate to severe. But they're the ones that go under the radar. They're the ones that are running around playing. You think they're all fine, and then they get a cold, and all of a sudden, that cold turns into pneumonia. And because they're deficient in vitamin A, which plays an important role in the immune system, get pneumonia real fast, and that is the top killer of children in the developing world now, acute respiratory infections. About half of all child deaths under age 5 are due to undernutrition. Now this is really a light of a ray, not just a ray, this is sunshine. This is a study that was done, several studies, pointing out the incredible role of vitamin A. It reduces all causes of child mortality in the developing world by 12 to 24%. And yet if we look globally, about 1/3 of children in the developing world under 5s are vitamin A deficient. And in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, about 48% of them are, and 44% in Asia. So there's a real window opportunity, and this is one of the linkages that I see that it has a lot of promise with people who are involved in agricultural programs to promote those orange-colored yams and sweet potatoes and carrots and moringa and all that kind of stuff. Any of y'all heard of the Copenhagen Consensus? There was this group of economists, not development workers, just economists. And the question was posed to them, If we give you $75 billion and you could invest it in anything you wanted to make the world a better place, what would you choose to invest it in? And they looked at a cost-benefit analysis, and they came out as the number one thing to invest in the nutrition of preschoolers, particularly in micronutrient deficiencies. The highest rate of return. Oops. Iron deficiency anemia is the number one micronutrient deficiency in the world. It saps the minds and bodies of millions of children and adults, actually affecting the gross national product, the work output of adults as well. And iodine, surprisingly enough, is the biggest cause of preventable mental retardation in the world. And maybe some of you agriculturalists could tell me this, since I'm in public health and maternal and child health, and that's, I understand that some of the soils that are older, like in the Andes, for instance, naturally have less iodine in them, and so then the nutrition, the produce that's grown from them is lower in iodine, and in other places it's not the case, and so it's not such a big problem. They're just, in your whole life, you'd need like the equivalent of a teaspoon of iodine. Of course, you wouldn't just take a teaspoon, but throughout your life. But it causes cretinism and a whole slew of developmental delays if you do not have those trace elements. The tragic thing is still in about a quarter of our world today, people do not have iodized salt. I remember where we worked in the Andes, there were the blue bags of salt and the red bags, and one was half a cent cheaper. And so most people would buy the one that didn't have it. And there were a couple of Cretans in the next village over, and we had children in the primary school that we worked so hard to get. And even like 3 years, the first grade class kept repeating, and the teachers are just, ¿qué pasa con estos niños que no pueden aprender nada? The ABCs, even the third year, it was because of that lack of that trace mineral. Vitamin A, oh wow. Look at those precious children. They look healthy. If you look at them, you wouldn't go and say, oh, these poor children, they're malnourished. But I'm telling you, if they don't have adequate vitamin A, they are very vulnerable. They're vulnerable and can easily become a statistic because of the relationship of nutritional status and infection and the immune system. Look at this stunting. Look at this picture. These are two girls from Bangladesh, and they are the same age, the same month of birth. And look at the difference in stature. Now, that line behind the girl that is more above the norm, that is the average. That age by international standards should be that height. I believe these girls are about 13. Now, it's not just that she's short, but that is a visible, if you measure it, it's visible. It's often hidden because we're not measuring it. But if you measure that against the international standards, you're like, wow, okay, she's really short. But how is that going to affect her mental capacity and development? Yes. Are there really small stunted people that were stunted as children? Yes, of course. But they'll never be what they could have been had they not had the severe malnutrition, this deprivation. The other thing that particularly hits girl children hard is the circumference of their hips in that stage tends to be a lot smaller. And so their likelihood for being a maternal mortality statistic has just really shot up. Okay. Here's Guatemalan children, and they should be at least the height of that yellow line. And see these precious children and look at them. They don't look like they're emaciated, but they are the thing about stunting is it's insidious because it's a long time deprivation, a long time throughout life. And it's especially interesting, there's a lesson from agriculture. I'm not an expert on chickens, but some of you might be, and I understand if you have a lot of infection, it keeps the growth down, it impacts the growth. Well, children who are exposed to a lot of infections at an early age, it takes so much of their defenses, is the theory, to keep the infections at bay that there's not that much left to spend and put into the growth. So how many of you have heard of this term, nutrition-sensitive agriculture? A few of you? Yeah, some of you are probably experts in it. Yeah. I was so excited when I found that term. It's like, wow, it's about time. For so long, I've seen in development, as I'm sure we all have, there are different sectors. There's the health sector, there's the agriculture sector, there's the economic development sector, and we know as development practitioners that they're interrelated, but we each have our area of expertise, and it just works out that we don't always intersect that often. There's a very unique opportunity with agriculture, though, because it has to do with food, and nutrition has to do with food, too. And also the statistic, about 75% of the world's poor are rural families who depend upon agriculture and related activities for sustenance. So it makes sense to connect those who work with the earth to grow food with good knowledge that can help them keep their families safe, well-nourished, and healthy. Now, I didn't come up with this, and I honestly don't remember or know who it was who did. But I think it's kind of insightful. It might be a little simplistic, but these are some factors contributing to world hunger and malnutrition. There's a problem with producing food. So we have just heard from Joshua some dramatic examples of conflict and in areas of the world where there is a problem to be able to produce food. But again, if we look globally, that's not the norm. That's less than 10% of the situation. You have famines, or it's interrupted with conflict, the regular production schedule. The second one would be buying food, problems with buying food. So maybe people are raising cash crops, but they didn't get enough because the market went down, and so they don't have enough money to buy what they usually would buy from the market. Or maybe they had plenty of money. It was a bumper crop this year of the cash crops, but they just went out and celebrated and bought a lot of Coke and junk food for their kids instead of nutritious food, either because they didn't know or they just wanted to celebrate in that way. And the third thing is feeding children. And this really should be the feeding and care of children. And it's not just because I have a bias in this area, because it's my field, but if you really look at the numbers, it is amazing. The children who are malnourished, the vast majority of children who are malnourished under 5, the most vulnerable ones, are surrounded by plenty of food and plenty of nutritious food. Plenty of vitamin A food, plenty of papayas. Seems like everywhere we went in the tropic, there were always these delicious papayas loaded with vitamin A. But for many different reasons, some of them cultural, the papaya wasn't given to the young children, and they still ended up being vitamin A deficient. But it's not just micronutrients, it's other things about feeding children. To me, this part, it's really interrelated with some of the ag stuff. I'm trying to read down there without glasses. I think that'll, let's see. So ways to connect agriculture with nutrition and health. It's all interrelated. We can promote nutrition-dense family gardens. We can pay attention to the effects of seasonality of crop production and labor demands on mothers and children. In some of the public health data, you'll see that the children get sicker during certain seasons, and sometimes it's been correlated to the planting season or to the harvest season because the mothers are involved very much in agriculture. So sometimes they're left at home. If they're small enough to be on her back, she might still take the child with her. But the little toddlers, who are the most vulnerable nutritionally, often get left home, and there's an older sibling who's in charge of that child, so they might not get fed as much and they might not be watched as well. So diarrhea is a killer, the dehydration from diarrhea. And you see that in the studies, that there's this correlation with these seasonality stuff in agriculture. So when we're doing agricultural program planning, that I think that would be a really good thing to consider. And not only the labor demands, but the seasonality of things that are produced when people are producing things that they actually consume. I've been in areas where, there's certain, if you do the mapping, we do a lot of community mapping and community development. So we'll do the agricultural mapping. How many of y'all have been involved in that, agricultural mapping? Yeah, and so you'll see, okay, January through March, there's plenty of this, that's the mango season. And then there's another season, and seasons overlap. But somewhere in the year, often, there's like a scarcity time, a 2 or 3 month period where it's between seasons and not that much is being produced or not that much of what the child usually gets. And 2 or 3 months in the life of a 12-month-old or an 18-month-old child, if they are not getting micronutrients or just regular food and calories that they need for that amount of time, can really have a permanent impact on that child's development. So I think that would be one way that we could work on, and kind of skipping down to number 4, because it has to do with the food preparation and processing techniques. So for instance, if we promoted, solar dryers to dry mangoes, for instance, so then when the mango season isn't there, you have the dried mangoes that the kids could still nibble on. So they would still be getting vitamin A during that time, for instance. Okay, back up to the third one. Focus closely on child feeding practices. That's huge. And why does it have to do with agriculture? Well, I see some linkages here because when I have worked with rural families who very much are involved in agriculture, they may be illiterate sometimes, the people who we've worked with, but they understand and are keen observers of nature. And so they see that it's important for the little baby cow to get milk from the mother, and they know about colostrum, that first milk that it looks like not milk, and they understand it in the animal world. And so it's kind of a neat linkage to say, what have you observed working with your cow or this? And then make the transfer to, well, like your cow, your baby, the cow's milk is perfect for the little cow, not for the pig, for the cow. And mom's milk is perfect for the baby. And that colostrum that the mother produces is the first vaccination. It has mother's live cells, and it is very good for your child. Put the baby to breast within an hour of birth. And by the way, it can actually save the mother's life too. Because of postpartum hemorrhaging, it helps to prevent that. Let's see. Another food preparation and processing techniques would be with biofortification, like moringa. I'm so happy that ECHO has played such a key role globally of promoting moringa and the seeds and research on it. So having the leaf powder to be able to fortify tortillas with, for instance. We've just returned from Honduras, from the National Agriculture University in Catacama. SIFAT has an MOU with them. We've been working with them since 2012. I love that university, and it's full of the students they are from every municipality of the country of Honduras. And they have come scholarshiped by the government to be there, and they come from some of the poorest areas. And so they are really gung-ho about doing something that will make a difference that they can transfer from the university and take back to the communities. And we were just promoting this biofortification with moringa powder. And Andrea, ¿dónde estás? ¿Estás por aquí? ¿Puedes ponerte de pie un ratito? I would like for y'all to see Andrea. She's going to do a session this afternoon. and she is a wonderful representative of her university. Her major is in food processing. And after SIFAT did the workshop and conference at that university with Leaf for Life founders, the Kennedys, who are wonderful. If some of y'all know them, they're great. They wasted no time. They immediately trained other people on the campus. She went to the comedor, the person in charge of the food making in the cafeteria, and asked if every Saturday they could serve green tortillas, and then every Wednesday. And then on Tuesdays, they're going to give out free drink samples, and they're really promoting it through the social marketing too. And I have a lot of hope of what they're doing and what people like Andrea, when they have solutions for things that are sustainable, and they just take the ball and run with it. They know their own context, and it's exciting to be involved in something like that. So that particular one was food preparation and processing techniques. Observe the impacts of water use and supply, because it's great to have irrigation projects, but we want to make sure it's not a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And if it contaminates the drinking water with pesticides, other types of environmental factors with the water use and supply. I wanted to bring this point back up because we may not think of it so much, but it's huge. There's this endless cycle of malnutrition, infection, and malnutrition. A malnourished child, undernourished child who's not quite getting enough calories or not quite getting enough of the micronutrients is much more vulnerable to infection, especially diarrhea, diarrheal disease, and they recover from it a lot slower. They're much more likely to die of it. Malnutrition, infection. Then the ones who have the infection, who drink unclean drinking water and get parasites also, that promotes more malnutrition. Because whatever they're eating, they're sharing it with these helminths that are considered by many to be the scourge of humankind. The hookworms can do a lot of damage. If you have hookworms in a malarious area, your children are really going to be hit hard with anemia. It's a double whammy, and the pregnant mothers too. Malnutrition, infection, that cycle. Here we see major causes of child mortality under the ages of 5. Children are the most vulnerable. So when we talk about hunger, a lot of times we look at children under 5. So you see the biggest killer, can you read it from there? Is pneumonia, ARIs, acute respiratory infections. And then the second one is diarrheal diseases. And basically, it's just death from dehydration. This is the bad news, but there's a flip side. It depends on what part you concentrate on. There is a good side to this, and that is that we have an incredible opportunity to impact those with appropriate technologies that could easily be promoted in agricultural programs too. And one of them is fuel-efficient cook stoves. It's related because the use of leña, how do you say that in English? Leña. Thank you. Of firewood, cutting down the trees, affecting the environment. So if we use fuel-efficient cook stoves, we're impacting the agriculture part of it. But it's huge in the health world as well. A few years ago, I think maybe 12 years ago, the World Health Organization came out with that smoke in the kitchen could be considered the 4th leading cause of morbidity and mortality, of death and disease in the developing world. And that was just astonishing to hear that figure. They've since tweaked it a bit, but that's when SIFAT really got involved in fuel-efficient cook stoves, was after those studies came out. That smoke is really bad. And it's synergistic, so it impacts if the child, if you are malnourished and then you're exposed to all of that smoke. Now they're even finding linkages with chronic diseases. It's not just pneumonia, which was the big thing, but also TB and COPD and a lot of other stuff. There's been interesting studies done on a child who is a little bit vitamin A deficient, who lives in a home where they cook with the traditional methods where there's a lot of smoke, depends on the study, 10 times more likely to die of pneumonia. Some studies find even more likely. It's just very amazing when you read the data. Some studies have found everywhere from, it's the equivalent, if you're a mother and you have a child on your back and you're doing the regular cooking, the equivalent of smoking between 2 to up to 10 packs of cigarette a day of the smoke inhalation. And it's many more toxic substances than are just in cigarettes. It also contributes a lot to premature birth of babies, which then are vulnerable because they will be malnourished early on. It's just but the good thing of this is that we can promote more vitamin A foods with family gardens. We can try to promote those orange sweet potatoes, unless we're in West Africa and they consider it the famine food, but we can try to promote the sweet potatoes and moringa and fortify the immune system and try to get the fuel-efficient cook stoves to really impact that death from pneumonia. And then the diarrheal diseases, the interesting thing there is, again, vitamin A, it just makes sense because it has to do with the health of your skin too, and the inside lining, say, of your lungs and then of your intestinal tract. It's smooth and more resilient to penetration of pathogens if you have enough. And so if you have enough vitamin A, you can throw off that diarrhea a lot faster. Okay. Now with the malnutrition infection cycle, I wanted to point this out to you. This is an average month in 3-year-old Juanchito's life. Okay, so let's say this is January. So the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of January, he had a little cold. He was kind of clogged up, so he didn't have much of an appetite, so he didn't eat that much. And then on the 13th and 14th there, he had diarrhea, which is just easy for a little 3-year-old to get when there's poor sanitation and just being a kid playing around. Then on the 16th, 17th, and 18th, he got a fever. His mom didn't know if it was malaria or dengue or what, but he sure didn't have an appetite and didn't want to eat anything when he had that fever. Then he got better and was playing around back in school. Then he had an upset stomach the 29th and the 30th, and so he didn't really feel like eating very much. That's a slice of life in many children's life in the developing world. Now count up how many days that is that the child hasn't had an appetite. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of 31 days, that's a third of the month. Multiply that by 12 months. So what we like to say to mothers in particular, to everybody needs to know facts for life to keep their children and their family healthy, is for every day your child was sick, try to give them an extra meal to catch up on the growth that they lost during that time. Child growth charts, the road to health. You see that? Ideally, you would weigh the child from the time of birth to at least 2 years old, hopefully 5 years old. And so we train mothers at the community level to make sure your child stays on the road to health, an upward growth every month. And if you see how on this one it went down underneath the road to health, you wouldn't really see it. You wouldn't really notice it until it was a little late. So this can stop malnutrition before it starts. Really fast, here are top 12 messages to promote child nutrition in agricultural families. And they are so easy. We can do it. It's doable without a lot of money. Promote breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months. And promote the fact that colostrum is good milk, or good for the child. And the second one is after 6 months, add complementary foods. It used to be called weaning foods. Because if you don't, that child will begin this spiral of malnutrition. And in the agricultural world, chickens, they like peck all day long. Those little children's stomachs are small. So we need to watch those little vulnerable children that are under 5 and try to feed them several small meals a day. And it's hard sometimes because if you are working in the fields, depends on which country you're in, but I've seen it many times where you might start a little fire in the morning and have some kind of like atol or some like gruel or tea or something. And then you go all day until you come back at night, start the fire and have the main meal. Well, for the parents, then you can bulk up and eat a lot of stuff. But for the children, that doesn't work because their stomachs are so small if they just eat around the adult schedule. So one of the ways we can work with that is to just be creative. And the women themselves in the communities will come up with creative ideas for each other. The solutions can often be right in the community. Like, what can you take that wouldn't spoil in the hot sun that you could feed your child who's with you when you're out in the fields? Or what could you leave home that wouldn't spoil in the heat to make sure that your child wouldn't be malnourished so they can eat at least 5 small meals a day. Number 4 is children need a variety of food. We call it the go foods with energy, the glow foods with the micronutrients that have colors, and the go foods. And one of the ways that we like to teach this is look at your plate. If your plate is all white, all carbs, something is missing. So that's just a very simple way of always commenting and encouraging people, where's the color? Where's the color? Because there's stuff there. I was in the headwaters of the Orinoco, and malnutrition was just really bad in the kids there. And then I tripped over a root vine, and it was a pumpkin. I was like, oh my gosh. There's so much needed vitamin A. And when I said, let's eat this, I was really the laughing stock of the whole village because that was only for pigs. But the glow foods, go, grow, and glow. Promote food preservation, as we mentioned earlier. Encourage hand washing and sanitation with AT. I hope y'all get a chance to go on that AT tour. The tippy taps, make it convenient. Because everybody says, oh yeah, do hand washing. Make it convenient. And make it accessible. What good does it do if you tell moms that and they don't have any soap and they don't have any water? So work with the local, what's there. Number 7, window opportunity. Deworm every 6 months. 1 little tablet of albendazole. The worms are bad stuff. A lot of studies on them, and it's easy to get rid of them temporarily. Long term is a lot longer process in community development. Feed sick and recovering children extra. We've already mentioned that. Vaccinate against major childhood diseases. Manage diarrhea with special ORT. Who's heard of ORT? I'm glad to see, but I'm not seeing a lot of hands. I want everybody to know about that because you'll run into it if you're working in the developing world. I'm going to show you a demonstration briefly. Number 11 is promoting growth monitoring, the charts that I just showed you. And that can be done. It's a low-tech thing. Local people can be trained how to do that. And number 12, get smoke out of the kitchen, because all these things have to do with nutrition and has to do with things that are realities in the lives of many farm families around the world. And now I would like to show you a couple of demonstrations. Is this on? Can I move over here? Okay. When we're working in the field, we never have PowerPoints. So I'm more comfortable doing it with demonstrations, but we see this a lot. Can you see it from there? Look at the color. Rice, potatoes, a banana, or plantain, or maybe yucca. Common. So we want to encourage, look at the colors, look at the colors. This is peanut butter. So if there's not eggs or if there's not meat, then maybe we can have peanut butter without aflatoxins. Dark green leafy vegetables for vitamin A. And I also want to show you this other demonstration. A 2-year-old child, depends on how old, how much they weigh, but they need an average of between 1,000 and 1,400 calories a day. So let's take the middle of that and say a 2-year-old child that needs 1,200 calories a day. Now I've got a cup here, and I'm not filling it all up because the 8 ounces is here. You know how many calories are in a cup of rice? About 200. About 200. So this is 1 cup, 200 calories. Now help me, we got to get up to 1,200 so our child won't be undernourished. And we could do this with yuca or any of the carbs. What's the count? I should have gotten one of you guys to come up and do this. That's what we usually do. Okay.
Don't give up, you're halfway there.
I'm halfway there, okay. How many is that? Is that enough? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. One more. Okay. Anybody in here got a 2-year-old? If you want that 2-year-old not to be undernourished from just calories, you're going to have to stuff this much rice in that little tummy. Now think, if it's only the normal thing is to eat 1 time a day, the big meal with the family, you can see why those little 12, the most vulnerable is like 12 months to 24, the first 1,000 days, you know, when they're under 2, and then 3, 4, they got to get some calories somehow. So we got to promote some denser types of stuff to add. So if you have peanut butter, I'm not just saying put it on rice, but you know, there's cool ways. In Africa, they put all kinds of wonderful peanut butter in the green leaves. But peanut butter has fat in it, and it's good fat. Avocados, that's the calorie dense, so put some avocados in it. Some fats that have 9 grams of calories, 9 calories per gram instead of 5 like carbohydrates do. So that's one thing, is making sure that we have dietary diversity and that we have enough of calorie-rich foods. And then I want to give you a demonstration. All right, this is the last demonstration, but this is ORT. It is a 1 liter of water, and it's 6 teaspoons of sugar that you put in here, and a half a teaspoon of salt. You mix it in there. You get the cleanest water possible, and you got a bunch of appropriate technologies to keep that water clean, including the moringa seeds and the solar distillation. Is that 5? 6. Okay. Now, this should be given when the child or the adult first has diarrhea. When this was discovered in the Center for Diarrheal Disease place in Bangladesh, instead of giving IVs, because this is accessible to people where they are when there's not IVs, they likened this, they said this had the potential of even better potential to save more lives than the advent of antibiotics. There's no reason why we all shouldn't know this and promote this. Even if our field is agriculture and not health, we'll have opportunities working with the community to implement things like this, or just to share things like this, to share things like that. So I encourage you, if you're in straight ag, branch a little bit, and we're finished. Let's see, just look at that. Okay. Exclusively breastfed baby is 14 times less likely to die in the first 6 months. How can we help women who work in the field? How can we support them in doing that? Simple thing is making sure they take water, because if they're not drinking water, and a lot of moms don't, they won't have milk, and then they'll think, I can't breastfeed because I don't have any milk. And it's really because they're not drinking water. So for the children, I hope and pray that all of you here who are in agriculture will expand and look and see how you can make your agricultural programs more nutritionally sensitive, so that we can have more children in our world that survive and thrive. Thank y'all.